When I called my son to ask what time I should arrive for my grandson's graduation party, the line went dead silent. Then came his wife's laugh in the background, sharp and cold, like breaking glass. "Oh, Harlan," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "The party was last Saturday. We didn't want to bother you with all the noise." 7 days later, they were both on their knees at the end of my driveway, begging me for mercy. I stood there looking down at them, the very people who had written me off as nothing more than a burden, and I gave them exactly 3 words. Get off my property. Welcome to Alphadadstories. I'm glad you found your way here. If stories about family loyalty and quiet strength speak to you, stay close and follow along, so you don't miss what's coming. Before we go further, I want to ask you something simple. Have you ever had to protect someone you love from the very people who were supposed to love them too? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. A note before we begin: some elements of this story have been shaped for the audio experience, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters most is the truth at the heart of it. I sat at my mahogany desk, the scent of lemon oil and aged leather hanging in the air. My hands, roughened by 40 years of civil engineering and bridge construction, moved with the kind of precision that only decades of practice can build. I was polishing a vintage Patek Philippe pocket watch. It had been my father's, and today it was meant to pass to Drew. My grandson was graduating high school with honors. This watch was more than a keepsake. It was a torch being handed down. I'd spent the morning pressing my best suit, the navy one I hadn't touched since my wife Elaine's funeral 3 years ago. I checked the time. 2:00 in the afternoon. The party was supposed to begin at 4 based on the vague text Clifton had sent 2 weeks back, though he'd never followed up with an address or any final confirmation. I picked up the phone and dialed Clifton's number. 4 rings. I pictured him rushing around, hanging balloons, maybe checking with the caterers. He picked up, but his voice was clipped. "Hey, Dad, is everything okay?" I smiled and shifted the phone to my other ear. "Everything's fine, son. Just checking the time. I've got the watch ready for Drew. Should I head over around 3:30 to help set things up?" A pause followed a long, uncomfortable silence that seemed to drain the air right out of my study. In the background, I could hear music, the clink of silverware, and then Renata, my daughter-in-law. Her voice was muffled, but I was trained to listen for stress fractures in concrete. "Old habits. Tell him we're busy," she hissed. "Tell him to stay home." Clifton cleared his throat. "Dad, look, plans changed. We decided to keep it really small, just us and some of Drew's friends. It's going to be loud and chaotic. Honestly, it's not really your scene. We'll swing by next Sunday for coffee." "Okay." My hand tightened around the phone. "Just you and Drew's friends?" "Yeah, exactly. Low key. You know how it is. Look, I've got to go." "Dad, love you." The line went dead. I sat there a long while, the stillness of that empty house pressing in from every direction. Low-key. Small. I looked down at the Patek Philippe. It gleamed under the desk lamp, a useless relic of a time when a man's word still meant something. I almost believed him. I wanted to believe him. Clifton was my only son. I had paid for his college education. I had covered the 40% down payment on his house in Westport. A man doesn't do all that and expect his own grandson's milestone to be kept from him. Then my iPad chimed. A Facebook notification. I rarely touched the thing, but Elaine had set it up years ago so we could follow the grandkids in photos. I swiped the screen open. The algorithm, merciless in the way only algorithms can be, surfaced a post right at the top of my feed. It was from Renata, uploaded 10 minutes ago. The caption read, "The perfect celebration for our genius Drew. So blessed to be surrounded by all our friends and family. Future leader, Ivy, league-bound. My finger hovered. I tapped the photos. There were dozens of them. And it was no small gathering. It was a gala. A white tent stretched across the lawn of the house I helped purchase. Waiters in black vests moved through the crowd carrying champagne trays. A string quartet played in the corner. And the guests, hundreds of them. I recognized faces. Clifton's colleagues, neighbors from down the road. I even spotted my old accountant grinning with a drink in his hand. Everyone was there, everyone except me. I zoomed in on one shot. Clifton and Renata were flanking Drew on either side. Renata wore a red dress that probably cost more than my first car, her hand resting possessively on Drew's shoulder, beaming. Clifton looked proud, scotch in hand, but Drew, my grandson, looked miserable. He was holding his diploma, but his eyes weren't aimed at the camera. He was looking down. A coldness moved from my chest out to the tips of my fingers. It wasn't sadness. Sadness was what I felt when Elaine died. This was something else entirely. This was the cold, clear-eyed recognition of a structural engineer who spots rot in the foundation. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. I stood up. My knees cracked, a reminder of my 68 years. But I didn't feel the pain. What I felt was a surge of adrenaline. I walked to the closet, but I didn't reach for the navy suit. That suit was for a respected father and grandfather. That man had not been invited. So instead, I grabbed my keys. Not the sedan keys, the keys to my 1996 Chevy Silverado. The truck I'd driven to construction sites for years. The truck Renata despised because she said it looked like poverty. I needed to see this for myself. The drive to Westport usually ran about 20 minutes. I covered it in 15. As I turned onto their street, oak trees lining the road hedges trimmed to perfection. The reality of it landed on me. The party wasn't just over. It was the wreckage. The white tent was still standing canvas, flapping slow in the breeze. A catering truck was hauling away tables. I pulled the Silverado up to the curb behind a sleek black Mercedes. I didn't climb out right away. I watched. Garbage bags were stacked high along the driveway. Clear plastic bags bulged with half-eaten food, foie gras, dry-aged prime rib black truffle risotto, and empty bottles of Domaine. I ran the numbers in my head. That was a $50,000 party at minimum. And just last week, Clifton had told me he couldn't manage the monthly repayment on the loan I'd given him. I stepped out of the truck. The air carried the smell of stale wine and expensive perfume. My boots crunched across the gravel as I came up the drive. The front door stood open. A cleaning crew moved in and out like clockwork. I spotted Rosa, the housekeeper, who'd been with them since Drew was a baby. She was lugging a heavy bag of linens. When her eyes found me, she nearly let it drop. "Mr. Harlan," she gasped. She shot a nervous glance back toward the house like she was checking for a guard dog. "You shouldn't be here. Mrs. Renata, she's upstairs sleeping." I looked at Rosa. She was a good woman, always found ways to send me pictures of Drew when the parents weren't paying attention. "Rosa," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "Why wasn't I invited?" She bit her lip. Tears began to gather. "Please, Mr. Harlan, don't make me say it. Tell me, Rosa. I need to know." She dropped her voice to barely a whisper. "Mrs. Renata told everyone you were sick. She told the guests you have dementia, that you get confused and aggressive, and it would be too much for Drew to deal with on his big day. She called it an act of mercy leaving you at home. Dementia. The word hung in the air like smoke you can't wave away. They hadn't merely excluded me. They had dismantled my reputation to paper over their own vanity. They painted me as a senile invalid. so no one would ask why the man who funded the roof over their heads wasn't standing in the tent. "Thank you, Rosa," I said. My voice was steady, shockingly steady. I turned and walked back to the truck. I didn't go inside. I didn't raise my voice. Screaming is for people who have run out of options. I hadn't. I was calculating. I needed to see Drew. I knew his routine. Monday afternoon, he'd be at the high school library returning his books before the summer break. He always retreated there when the noise at home got to be too much. I drove to the school and waited in the lot. When he came through the door, shoulders rounded a stack of textbooks under his arm. Something in my chest gave way just a little. He didn't carry himself like a boy who'd just graduated. He looked like someone bearing a weight he couldn't name. I tapped the horn lightly. Drew looked up. When he recognized the old Silverado, his face lit just for a moment. Then the light was replaced by worry. He jogged over, checking behind him as he came. "Grandpa," he whispered, leaning into the window. "You can't be here. If Mom finds out I talked to you, she'll lose it. Get in, Drew. Just for a minute." He hesitated, then slid into the passenger seat. The cab smelled of old coffee and sawdust, a smell Drew used to love when he was small. He sank back against the seat. "I saw the photos, Drew," I said. He flinched. "I wanted you there, Grandpa. I swear I argued with them about it. I told them I didn't want any party if you weren't going to be there. Then why?" I asked. "Why the lie? Why did they tell people I was sick?" Drew looked down at his hands, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "Because of the investor, Grandpa. Dad is trying to launch that new marketing firm. He invited this man named Mr. D. I don't know his full name. Big shot real estate guy," Mom said. He took a shaky breath, voice unsteady. "Mom said Mr. D is all about appearances. She said she said you look blue-collar. She said if you turned up in your old truck and started telling stories about mixing cement, the investors would think they were low class. She said you'd embarrass them." I stared through the windshield at the brick wall of the high school. Embarrassed them. I who had designed and built the bridges these people crossed on their way to high-rise offices. I who had pulled 16-hour shifts in freezing rain so Clifton could attend private school. And now I was a blemish on their brand. "And your father?" I asked, though I already knew. "What did he say?" Drew wiped a tear from his cheek. "Dad said Mom was right. He said the party was about networking, not family. He said, you served your purpose and now they need to focus on the future." Served my purpose. Like a tool worn past usefulness. Like scaffolding stripped away once the structure is standing on its own. I reached into my pocket and drew out the Patek Philippe. I pressed it into Drew's hand. "Happy graduation, kid." "Grandpa, I can't take this. Mom will sell it. She sells everything you give me." "Keep it out of sight," I said. "Hide it where you hide your true self, Drew, because you are going to need a reminder of who you really are when the storm hits. And believe me, a storm is coming." I drove Drew home, dropping him off a block short so no one would see him with me. On the drive back to my empty house, the sadness lifted. What replaced it was cold and hard, a resolve that had no temperature, no waver. They wanted to play image games. They wanted to throw around words like net worth and assets. Fine. They had written me off as a senile old man. They forgot that before I was a retiree, I was a chief engineer. I knew how to build things. More crucially, I knew exactly where to set the charges when it was time to bring something down. I walked into my study and opened the safe behind the painting of the Housatonic River. I pulled out a thick red folder. Inside were the deed to their house, the loan agreements, and the power of attorney documents Clifton had signed 5 years ago when he was nearly bankrupt the first time around. I picked up the phone, but this time my son wasn't on the other end. I was calling Audra Crane, the most ruthless litigator in the state of Connecticut. "Audra," I said when she picked up, "it's Harlan." "Harlan, I haven't heard from you in months. Is everything all right?" "No, Audra. Everything is wrong, but I'm about to put it right. I need you to dig into Clifton's financials. I want every debt, every credit card, every lien. And Audra, prepare the foreclosure papers on the Westport property." A pause on the line. Then the click of a lighter and the slow exhale of smoke. "I always did love your timing, Harlan," she said. "I'll clear my schedule." I set the phone down. Outside, the sun was dropping low, throwing long shadows across the lawn. They wanted a life without me in it. They were about to find out the precise cost of that arrangement. The party was finished. The reckoning was only beginning. The automatic doors of Centerline Trust Bank parted with a whisper, drawing me into the cool, hushed lobby. 9 in the morning on a Tuesday. Nearly empty, just a security guard who gave me a nod and a teller working through a stack of fresh bills. I walked directly to the glass-walled office at the back. I had no appointment, but when you've banked at the same institution for 40 years, you don't need one. Mr. Bellamy, the branch manager, looked up from his screen. Young man, 30 maybe, with a tie that was too wide and a smile that had been rehearsed too many times. When he saw me, that smile slipped for just a fraction of a second. A micro-expression, the kind a poker player tries to bury. But I caught it. He knew something. "Mr. Mercer," he said, rising and extending a hand that felt slightly damp. "What a surprise. I thought you were—" He caught himself. "Well, I'd heard you weren't feeling well." I left his hand where it was and settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "My son tells a great many stories, Mr. Bellamy. I'm fit as a fiddle. I'm here to review the Drew Mercer Education Trust." Bellamy swallowed. His Adam's apple moved visibly. He lowered himself back into his seat, fingers hovering above the keyboard. "The Education Trust." "Right. Of course. Any particular transaction you're looking for?" "I'm not looking for a particular transaction," I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on his desk. "I want the full balance. My grandson starts college in 3 months. I intend to write a cashier's check for his tuition today." The typing filled the silence. Click, clack, click. Bellamy stared at his screen, and I watched the color leave his face one shade at a time. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, I'm confused. The account was closed last Thursday." The air went still. I felt a sharp pain in my chest and pressed it back down. "Closed," I said, my voice dropping. "That is a trust fund, Mr. Bellamy. It requires my signature and a witness to access." "Who authorized the closure?" Bellamy turned the monitor so I could see it. On the screen was a scanned withdrawal slip. The amount, $250,000, the entire balance. And at the bottom, in blue ink, was a signature. Harlan Mercer. It was a competent forgery. I'll give them that. But careless in the small details. The loop on the capital M curved the wrong direction, the way I used to sign my name 20 years ago, not how I sign it now. They had traced it from an old document. "That is not my signature," I said. Bellamy looked like a man who wanted to disappear through his chair. "But Sir Mr. Clifton came in with the power of attorney documents. He said you were incapacitated. He presented a notarized letter from the physician stating you were unfit to manage your finances due to cognitive decline." Cognitive decline. The lie at the party wasn't just a social convenience. It was a legal framework. They had constructed a dementia narrative deliberately to bypass the bank's security protocols. "Show me the doctor's note," I said. Bellamy opened another file. The letter was signed by a Dr. A.J. Soprano. I let out a short, dry laugh. That was a character from a television program. They had purchased a fraudulent medical certificate from some back-alley operation, and this bank had accepted it without so much as a phone call to me. I stood up. Mr. Bellamy, print everything. Every withdrawal, every transfer, and a copy of that fraudulent power of attorney. You will freeze every account associated with my name effective immediately. If a single penny moves out of this institution, I will sue it down to the last ATM on the property. 30 minutes later, I walked out carrying a thick manila envelope. Sunlight hit the pavement, but I felt as though I were moving through a squall. My son had not merely stolen money. He had stolen my identity. He had declared me mentally incompetent in order to rob his own child. I drove straight into downtown Westport. Not to the police. Not yet. The police are a blunt instrument, and this situation called for something finer. I needed Audra Crane. Audra's office occupied the top floor of a steel and glass tower. 70 years old, 5 years my senior, and the most formidable woman in Connecticut. She kept no receptionist. She didn't believe in the concept. I walked into her office and found her at the window surveying the city she had spent 50 years suing. She didn't turn when I came in. "I heard you were dead or losing your mind, Harlan," she said, her voice roughened by decades of unfiltered cigarettes. "Which is it?" I tossed the manila envelope onto her glass desk. It landed with a solid thud. "Neither. I'm just angry." Audra turned. She had on a sharp white suit that gave her the look of some spectral instrument of justice. She sat put on her reading glasses and opened the envelope. She read without a word. The only sound was pages turning. Her face was unreadable throughout a statue of pure concentration. After 10 minutes, she closed the folder. "Sloppy," she said. "Clifton was always a second-rate liar. But this is desperation. He didn't merely forge a signature, Harlan. He committed wire fraud, bank fraud, and elder abuse. That's 15 years in federal prison at minimum." "That's just the beginning," I said. "I want a full asset search. I want to know what else he's been doing." Audra turned back to her computer. "I've already started. I picked up the alert on your credit report this morning. That's why I was expecting you." She turned the screen toward me. I looked at a web of figures and connecting lines that turned my stomach. "Let me walk you through the anatomy of the disaster," Audra said, tapping a manicured finger against the display. "This is your property, the farmhouse on Sycamore Lane. You own it, free and clear, correct?" I nodded. "Paid off the mortgage in 1997. "Not anymore," Audra said. 6 months ago, a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, was drawn against the property for $400,000, the maximum available. How, I asked. "The deed is in my name." Audra clicked open a document. They forged a quitclaim deed. They transferred the title to a shell company called WK Holdings, Harlan Mercer Holdings, presumably. Then Clifton, as director of that entity, took out the loan. He used your own home as an ATM. And Harlan, he hasn't made a single payment. The bank has already issued a notice of default. You are 30 days from foreclosure. Foreclosure. The word settled in the air like smoke. My home. The place where I raised my son. The place where Elaine planted her gardenias. They had gambled it away without a word to me. "There is more," Audra continued, her voice stripped of any warmth, just cold, hard facts. "Look at these credit cards. 5 of them all opened in your name within the last year. Total debt, $80,000. And here is where it gets ugly. Look at where the money is actually going." I leaned in closer. The statements showed transfers to a company called Pinnacle Realty Group. "I know that name," I said. "That is the firm connected to Mr. D, the investor they were performing for at the party." Audra nodded. "Exactly. It's a Ponzi scheme, Harlan. A high-yield real estate investment scam. Clifton isn't just spending recklessly on a lifestyle. He is trying to purchase his way into a club that was never real. He took your liquid assets, the trust fund, the equity in your home, and poured all of it into Pinnacle Realty Group. He believes he is a visionary investor. In reality, he is the mark. I leaned back, feeling the full mass of the betrayal pressing down on my chest. It wasn't only greed, it was stupidity. Arrogant, catastrophically blind stupidity. He had torched our entire family legacy to buy magic beans. "Can we stop the foreclosure?" I asked. Audra lit a cigarette, indifferent to the smoke detector mounted above her head. "We can do considerably better than that. We can prove fraud. Because the deed transfer was forged, the mortgage is legally invalid. We can recover your house. But to do it, we have to file a police report. We have to formally accuse Clifton of a felony. Once we pull that trigger, Harlan, there is no walking it back. He will go to jail." I looked out the window at the skyline below. I could see bridges I had built, steel and concrete, honest work. They stood because they obeyed the laws of physics. Cheat those laws and the bridge falls. It was that simple. Clifton had tried to cheat the laws of life itself. "I'm not sending him to jail yet," I said quietly. Audra raised an eyebrow. "So you are letting him walk away with it?" "No," I said. "Jail is too easy. Behind bars, he gets to play the victim. He can blame the system. He can blame me. I want him to understand with full clarity what he has actually done. I want to strip away the illusions first." I looked at Audra. "Buy the debt." "Excuse me. You heard me. The bank wants to foreclose." "Fine. Use my remaining assets, the bonds, the retirement accounts I kept separate and hidden. Buy the non-performing note from the bank. I want to be the one holding the mortgage. I want to hold the lien on his house as well." Audra smiled, slow and shark-like. "You want to become his creditor." "I want to own him," I said. "I want to own the debt, the house, the cars, everything. When that house of cards collapses, I intend to be the one deciding who gets buried in the rubble." Audra typed rapidly. "It will take 48 hours to set up the shell corporation to purchase the debt so he doesn't trace it back to you. What do we call it?" "Don't call it Nemesis. Call it the foundation," I said. "Because that is exactly what I am reclaiming." She printed out a stack of documents. "One more matter, Harlan. The power of attorney he used. We need to revoke it. But if we revoke it publicly, the bank notifies him." "Don't revoke it yet," I said. "Let him believe he is still safe. Let him think the money keeps flowing. I want him walking into that meeting with Mr. D convinced he is a millionaire." Audra passed me a pen. "You are a dangerous man, Harlan Mercer." I signed the retainer agreement. The ink was black, and it didn't wash out. "I'm not dangerous, Audra. I am simply a father who must teach his son a lesson he should have absorbed 20 years ago. You do not steal from the hand that built everything you have." As I stepped out of her office, my phone buzzed. A text from Clifton. "Hey, Dad. Sorry about the mix-up with the party. Renata feels terrible. Maybe we can do dinner next month. Hope you're getting some rest." I read the message. Next month. He thought he had a month. He thought he still had a future. He had no idea I had just purchased his past, his present, and his destruction. I didn't reply. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked to my truck. The noise of the city fell away, replaced by the sound of my engine turning over. I had the evidence. I had the strategy. What remained was tightening the noose. The investor meeting was in 2 days. I knew the location, and I knew precisely what I was going to do. But first, I had to protect the only thing that truly mattered: Drew. I needed to ensure that when the walls came down, He was nowhere near the blast radius. I drove back toward the suburbs, the skyline shrinking in the rearview mirror. The sun was going under the horizon, bleeding the sky in bruised purples and deep reds. It was fitting. Night was closing in on Clifton Mercer, and he had no idea that the thing coming for him in the dark was the man who used to check under his bed for monsters. The name Pinnacle Realty Group had a polished ring to it, but in my field, the flashier the name, the hollower the foundation. I sat in my truck engine, idling eyes fixed on the address listed in the wire transfer documents Audra had uncovered. It wasn't a skyscraper. It wasn't a downtown financial headquarters. It was a mail drop in a strip mall wedged between a dry cleaner and a discount liquor store. A cold smirk crossed my face. My son, the marketing genius, the man who claimed to grasp the intricacies of modern finance, had been funneling our family's assets into a mailbox. But a mailbox is just a mouth. I needed to know who was waiting at the other end to be fed. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't touched in a decade. It belonged to an old contact at the county clerk's office, a woman named Dottie who knew every parcel of land and every underhanded deal in Westport going back to 1979. "Dottie, it's Harlan Mercer," I said. "Harlan," she answered, her voice warm but surprised. "I heard you'd retired. I heard you were out of the game." I finished the thought for her. "Not quite. I need a favor, Dottie. I need to know who is behind a shell company called Pinnacle Realty, and I need to know whether they have filed any inquiries against my property on Sycamore Lane." There was the sound of keys clicking on her end. "Give me a minute, Harlan. The system is slower than it used to be." I waited. The seconds counted down like a timer. I watched people moving in and out of the liquor store, oblivious, their lives uncomplicated, compared to the web I was pulling apart, thread by thread. "Harlan," Dottie said, and her tone had shifted. Lower, grave. "You are not going to like this. Pinnacle Realty is a holding entity. The primary shareholder is a man named Garrett Dole." The name hit me like a structural beam to the chest. Garrett Dole. For a moment, I couldn't draw a breath. I wasn't in my truck anymore. I was standing on a job site 25 years ago. Garrett Dole had been my subcontractor on the Housatonic Bridge project. A man who believed profit margins outranked safety codes every time. I had caught him cutting the concrete mix with sand to pad his margins. I fired him on the spot and reported him to the licensing board. His career as a legitimate builder was finished. As security walked him off the site, he had screamed at me. He swore he would make me pay. He swore he would dismantle everything I had ever built, piece by piece. I had put him out of my mind entirely. He was nothing more than a bad memory, a footnote buried in a long career. But he had not forgotten me. "He's not just an investor, is he, Dottie?" I asked, my grip on the steering wheel going white at the knuckles. "No," she said. "He is a land speculator now, passing himself off as a developer. And Harlan, there is more. A zoning application was filed 3 days ago, a request to rezone your 50-acre farm from residential agricultural to commercial mixed use. The plan calls for demolishing the farmhouse and replacing it with a strip mall. Demolish my house. The house where I carried Elaine across the threshold. The house where Drew took his first steps. The garden where Elaine's prize roses still opened every spring. Dole didn't want money alone. He wanted to pave over my memories. He wanted to grind my life's work into a parking lot. Who signed the application? I asked, though the nausea was already rising. Dottie hesitated. It was signed by Clifton Mercer, acting as power of attorney for Harlan Mercer. The betrayal was now total. It wasn't only that Clifton had been stealing money. He had made a deal with the one man on earth who despised me most. He had sold his own father to his father's worst enemy, and for what I ended the call and drove. Not home. I drove somewhere Clifton would never think to look for me. His office, or rather the expensive co-working space he leased to project an air of success. I walked past the front desk receptionist who moved to stop me. I found Clifton in a glass-walled conference room. He was leaning back in his chair, laughing, talking to someone on a video call. On the screen was Garrett Dole, older balder, but carrying the same predator's eyes I remembered from the job site. I stood outside the glass and watched. I couldn't make out the words, but body language doesn't lie. Clifton looked eager, hungry to impress. Dole looked like something that had already decided what it was going to eat. Then I saw Clifton hold up a thick roll of blueprints. My blueprints. Everything in me went still. Those were not just old drawings. They were the original schematics for the patent I held on suspension bridge tension systems. My intellectual property. The legacy I had intended to leave Drew, something that would generate royalties for decades. Clifton was holding them out like a gift. He was showing them to Dole. That was the moment I understood the full depth of Clifton's ignorance. He had no idea what he was holding. To him, they were just old papers, a sweetener to close the deal. He was trading a multi-million-dollar patent for a quick injection of cash to cover his gambling debts. Dole understood perfectly. I could see the hunger in his eyes on that screen. He was about to walk away with both the land and the technology for a fraction of their value, and he was using my own son to deliver them. I stepped back before Clifton could spot me. Storming in now would interrupt the transaction, but it would not end the war. Dole would simply find another angle. Clifton would manufacture another lie. No, I needed them to believe they had already won. I walked back to my truck mind, running on cold, precise calculations. Clifton thought he was a partner. Dole thought he was a conqueror. They were both mistaken. They were nothing but excessive loads on a bridge that was about to give way. I dialed Audra. Change of plans, I said. Harlan, you sound different. I know who the buyer is, I told her. It's Garrett Dole. A sharp intake of breath on the line. The man you got delicensed. Harlan, this isn't business anymore. This is a vendetta. Exactly, I said. He wants the farm and he wants the patents. Clifton is handing them over this Friday at the closing. We need to block the closing, Audra said. An emergency injunction, I can get one. No, I said. Let it go forward. Are you out of your mind? She hissed. You will lose everything. I won't lose a thing, I said, watching through the window as Clifton strolled out of the building with a smug grin on his face. Because Clifton does not own the farm and he does not own the patents. He is selling property he has no clear title to. The power of attorney Audra started is void the moment I establish that he has been using it to commit fraud. I want them to sign, I said, cutting her off. I want Dole to wire the funds. I want Clifton to sign the deed. I want them to commit every element of this crime on paper in front of witnesses with the ink dried. I want Dole to plant his flag on my land and believe he has won. I want him to stand there and gloat. And then I am going to pull the floor out from under both of them. Audra was quiet for a moment. Then came a dry, dark chuckle. You're setting a trap. I am not setting a trap, Audra. I am building a cage. And on Friday, the rats are going to walk right into it. I started the engine. The anger was gone. Replacing it was something far more useful, a terrifying, frictionless clarity. My son had made his choice. He had chosen the enemy. Now he would share that enemy's fate. I pulled away and left Clifton to his celebration. Enjoy it, son, I thought. It is the last moment of happiness you will have for a very, very long time. I sat alone in my truck on a bluff overlooking the sound. The water below was gray and restless, a mirror for the turmoil that had finally frozen solid inside my chest. For the past hour, I had been running the film of Clifton's life. I saw the 6-year-old boy who put a rock through a neighbor's window, and I saw myself writing the check so he would never feel the consequence. I saw the teenager who picked up a DUI, and I saw myself hiring the lawyer who scrubbed it from the record before it could touch his future. I saw the college dropout who needed seed money for a venture that never got off the ground, and I saw myself signing the withdrawal slip. Standing there in the mental wreckage of a collapsed bridge, I finally recognized the truth. I was the architect of this disaster. I had treated my son like a fragile structure requiring constant reinforcement. I had shielded him from wind and rain and the weight of his own choices, and because he never felt the strain, he never built the strength to carry it. He was hollow, a man, painted to look like marble filled underneath with rot. And now the rot was reaching for everything I had built. Not just the money. Money is paper and numbers. He was selling our name. He was selling my integrity to a man like Garrett Dole. He was trading away my grandson's future. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Not with age, not with fear, with a rage so deep it had taken on physical weight. I drew a slow breath, pulling in the cold, salt air. When I let it out, the trembling was gone. The father in me. The one who forgave, the one who made excuses. The one who wrote the checks died in that moment. What remained was the engineer. And the engineer understood that when a structure is fundamentally unsound, you don't fill the cracks. You condemn the building. You strip it back to the skeleton. You make it bear actual load. And if it fails, you let it fail so that something honest can rise from the wreckage. I was not going to rescue Clifton Mercer. I was going to let him break. I put the truck in gear and headed to the brokerage firm where I held my private retirement accounts. These were not the funds Clifton knew existed. These were the bonds I had purchased 30 years ago, the blue-chip positions I had built up quietly, money I had earmarked for travel with Elaine. Now they would serve a different purpose entirely. I walked in and requested an immediate liquidation. The broker, a man named Grover, who had managed my portfolio for a decade, stared at me as if I had just announced I was walking into traffic. "Mr. Mercer," he said, adjusting his glasses, "the market is down. If you liquidate now, you are taking a significant hit, and the tax implications. Are you certain you want to move this much cash?" "I am not buying a boat." "Grover," I said, my voice flat and even, "I am buying a lesson. Wire the funds to the escrow account at Audra Crane's firm. Mark it for immediate transfer." I watched him key in the commands. I watched my life savings, the cushion I had built against old age, disappear from the screen. It was terrifying. It was also, in a strange way, liberating. I was pushing everything I had to the center of the table. I was betting it all on my ability to outthink my own son. Once the transfer confirmed, I called Audra. "The money is there," I said. "I received the notification," she replied. "You are now the sole investor in the Foundation LLC. We've already reached out to the bank holding Clifton's mortgage and the credit card debt." The bank was delighted to shed a deadweight asset off its books. 10 minutes ago, Harlan, that burden became yours." "Good," I said. "Move on to the second phase." "What does phase 2 look like?" she asked. "The acceleration clause," I said. "Nearly every mortgage carries a provision letting the lender demand the full balance on the spot, triggered by fraud or by the property being used for something illegal. Clifton secured that loan with a forged deed. Fraud is exactly what that is." "So you're calling the loan?" Audra asked. "Not yet," I said. "First I need everything assembled. Foreclosure notice written up, stamped, and sitting ready to be delivered. Except I won't be mailing it to his front door. I'll be putting it directly in his hands. When at the closing table I said Friday, the moment he settles in across from Garrett Dole to sign my farm away." I want to be the one who slides that paper in front of him. Audra held the silence for a beat. That's a hard thing to do, Harlan. It's the only thing to do. It's necessary, I said. He walks around believing he's one of the big players. All I'm doing is making sure he understands the game's rules. I ended the call and pointed the truck toward the cemetery. I needed Elaine. The afternoon sun sat high overhead, pressing sharp shadows between the granite markers. I lowered myself to one knee at her grave and picked a few stray weeds from around the stone's base. I'm sorry, Laney. I breathed into the cold ground. I swore to you I'd look after him. I swore I'd protect him, and I let you down. Worse, I shielded him so well he never learned what anything cost. I turned him into someone who'd auction off our home just to buy himself a seat somewhere he was never invited. My fingers traced the carved letters of her name. I have to wound him to pull him back, Laney. I have to play the villain in his story so he can one day right himself as the man he should have been. If that means he carries resentment toward me until his last breath, I can live with that. What I cannot do is stand by while he hauls Drew into the wreckage alongside him. I won't let him trade your roses away to Garrett Dole. I rose to my feet and knocked the dirt from my knees. Something quiet and settled moved through me. The course was fixed. No detours remained. I was no longer the one being taken advantage of by my son's hunger. I had become the mechanism of his correction. I headed back toward town, but home wasn't my destination. I pulled into a farm supply store instead. Moving through the aisles, I breathed in that well-worn combination of raw timber and machine oil. I picked out a padlock-hardened steel heavy-duty with a short shackle engineered to laugh at bolt cutters. Then I pointed the truck out to the farm, my farm. The acreage Clifton was convinced he'd be signing over by Friday. I rolled up to the main gate, the one opening onto the pasture Dole had earmarked for a parking structure. I stepped down and ran a thick chain around the gate posts. I seated the new padlock and snapped it home. I pulled against it hard. It didn't move. Go ahead and come, I told the empty fields. Bring the surveyors, bring the architects. Roll in with the checkbooks and the smooth talk. Every inch of this ground is mine, and anyone who wants it is going to have to come through me first. I checked my phone for the time. Wednesday evening. 48 hours to the closing. 48 hours before the mechanism completed its cycle. I returned to the house, put on a strong pot of coffee, and claimed my chair on the porch. Out in the yard, fireflies blinked on and off in the gathering dusk. I was no longer a man sitting with death. I was a man with an appointment on Friday. And for the first time in a long while, I felt it, that sharp, almost dangerous current of being fully alive. The change in me was total. Harlan the retiree had been put away. Harlan the reckoning had stepped forward. Thursday came in, wearing borrowed peace. Connecticut's sky was as unbroken, brilliant blue, the sort of morning that suggests cookouts and open roads along the water. But within the walls of my study, the temperature was surgical. I wasn't admiring any view. I was fixed on the array of glowing monitors in front of me, where the systematic unmaking of my son's financial life was set to begin. Construction had been my whole career. I understood load paths, concrete pours, the tensile strength of welded steel joints. But what I was doing now ran in reverse. I had crossed over into demolition, and any experienced demolition man will tell you the blast is almost secondary. What matters is identifying the load-bearing members and compromising them one by one so the structure brings itself down. Audra had been at it all night. The email timestamps told me so, a record of sleeplessness and exacting work. 2:00 a.m., 3:15 a.m., 4:45 a.m. Every attachment she sent was a loaded weapon. By 8 o'clock that morning, the shell company we had registered under the name Foundation LLC was up and running. No face, no personality, a clean phantom inside the financial system. And effective that morning, it held legal title to the entire catalog of debt Clifton Mercer had ever run up. I set down my coffee and cracked open the first file. Master controls for the credit freeze. Clifton had built his whole existence on borrowed money. Nothing he showed the world was his. He was renting a life, and the interest rates were punishing. 5 major credit cards, every one of them pressed to its ceiling to prop up the performance of wealth. A platinum card for flights, a black card for restaurant tabs, store accounts for the designer suits he wore, while selling stories to people who trusted him. I guided my cursor to the administrative panel the bank had granted us access to. The debt portfolio purchase gave me review rights over their risk exposure. And the power of attorney, the one Clifton had forged, but which still sat live in the system, handed me administrator-level control until the moment I chose to revoke it. Cutting the cards outright wasn't the move. Too clean, too quick. I routed them all to fraud review instead. I clicked the first entry, American Express showing active. I selected the security freeze. Reason suspicious activity. In my mind, I placed Clifton exactly where he'd be at that hour. Breakfast. His usual table at the cafe he favored in downtown Westport, the one where the coffee ran $8 and every barista greeted him by name. He'd be working through a macchiato and a croissant, wearing his ease like a costume, convincing everyone nearby that success was simply his natural condition. He'd open his wallet. He'd tap the card to the reader. The machine would beep once. A red indicator. Declined. He'd brush it aside with a short laugh. Chip malfunction, he'd say. He'd produce the backup. Visa signature. My mouse moved. Click. Visa signature frozen. He'd reach for the MasterCard. Click. Frozen. Then he'd go for the debit card on the joint account, the same account he'd been running down by pilfering the education trust. I held on that one. That account was the direct line to the money he had stolen. I entered the command, flagging it for internal audit. That didn't merely block a card, it put a wall around every dollar sitting in that account. No withdrawal possible. No transfer, no quiet shuffle of funds to spare him the scene. He'd be standing at that counter in a $2,000 suit, unable to cover an $8 coffee. But the cards were only the outermost layer. I had further to go. I pulled up the vehicle file. Clifton and Renata moved through the world in matching Range Rovers leased naturally 3 months in arrears on both. The lender had extended patience on account of the Mercer name operating on the assumption that the money existed somewhere. The Foundation LLC did not operate on assumptions. I lifted the receiver and dialed the repossession outfit Audra had lined up. A gravelly voice picked up on the first ring. "This is Mr. Mercer." I said, my voice scraped flat of any color. "Ma calling on behalf of the Foundation. We've taken over the notes on 2 vehicles registered at 450 Sycamore Lane." "Got the paperwork in front of me," the man said. "We've been sitting on go." "Then go," I said. "One condition, though. I don't want them pulled from the driveway." Silence. "So where's the pickup?" "Tomorrow noon, he has a meeting," I said. "Harrington Office Park. Both cars will be sitting in the visitor lot. That's when I want them taken broad daylight lot full of people." The man let out a low chuckle. "Cold move, friend. I respect it." I put down the phone. Lifting the cars from his own driveway would sting him privately. Having them towed from a business meeting stripped him bare in front of witnesses. That was the difference between a pinch and a wound. I wanted Garrett Dole standing at a window watching his partner's vehicle get chained to a flatbed. I wanted that seed of doubt germinating well before I ever entered the room. After that, I turned to the club membership, the Westport Country Club. It was the gravitational center of their social world, the venue where Renata staged her charity functions, and Clifton worked the fairways for his next round of unsuspecting marks. It was also where they ran up a monthly tab of $4,000 in dining and event charges. I composed a formal letter from the foundation to the club's board of directors, a notice of Lyon. We were informing them that member Clifton Mercer was under financial investigation for insolvency. Under the club's own bylaws, any member entering bankruptcy proceedings faced automatic suspension of privileges, shielding the club from liability exposure. I clicked send. By mid-afternoon, a new name would be sitting on the gate guard's clipboard. When Renata pulled up for her tennis lesson, the barrier wouldn't lift. She'd have to back out with her friends watching. She'd have to find some explanation for why her access had stopped working. The fractures were multiplying now, threading through every carefully constructed corner of their existence. I leaned back, the quiet of the study pressing in around me. It had been almost effortless. Within a single hour, I had pulled apart the scaffolding of their entire lives. Strip away the credit, the status, the symbols, and what were they left with? Children wearing costumes that were never theirs to begin with. But the final element of the blockade carried the most weight. It was the communication blackout. Banks, when they move on accounts like this, send a cascade of alerts, emails, texts, certified mail. I had to make certain none of that reached Clifton before it was too late. He needed to walk into Friday's closing without a clue of what was waiting for him. I pulled up the family mobile plan. It was the one account I still carried openly, a holdover from years ago when I wanted to be sure my grandchildren could always get through to me. As the account holder, the settings were mine to control. Shutting the phones off entirely would have raised flags immediately, so instead I turned on the parental control features. I configured a filter across Clifton and Renata's numbers. Any incoming call from outside their contact list would go straight to voicemail. Any text carrying words like bank alert, fraud, declined, or suspension would be quietly tucked into an archive, never pushing a notification to their screens. A digital cage. The outside world would be sending up flares, trying to warn them the building was burning, and they wouldn't register a single alarm. They would hear only the comfortable quiet of their own certainty. I watched the confirmation come through as the settings locked in. Done. They were now sealed off completely, walking straight toward the edge, and I had cleared away every sign that marked the drop. My gaze drifted to the framed photo in the corner of my desk. Drew, age 7, holding a fishing rod, flashing a wide, gap-toothed grin. Something in my chest pulled hard. This was why I had to keep holding on to that. Every account frozen, every mouse click, every piece of paperwork, it was all mortar in the wall I was raising around that boy's future. I opened one final window. A new trust fund drawn up the day before with Audra's help. This one was built differently from anything I'd done before. Irrevocable, blind, governed by no one in our family. A panel of independent fiduciaries held the reins. I moved what remained of my liquid holdings into it. This was Drew's money, tuition, a first apartment, the foundation of a life no one could take from him. One condition, and it was absolute. Not a cent could be released if his parents held any path to access it. Should Clifton or Renata ever attempt to reach into this trust, the entire sum would dissolve automatically and pass to a charity for stray dogs. I authorized the transfer. The funds cleared my account. On paper, I was now a man of modest means. I had converted my accumulated wealth into my son's debt and my grandson's protection. No cash reserves, no savings to speak of. Only a ledger full of promissory notes and the deed to a farm that was about to become the ground of a battle. The phone rang. Audra. "It's done," she said. The liens are on record at the county courthouse. The foundation holds the primary lien position on the Westport property. We beat the other creditors to the filing window by 6 hours. Did the notices go out? I asked. They did, she confirmed. But per your instructions, the physical copies were mailed to your address. You're the power of attorney. Clifton won't lay eyes on a single document until you place it in front of him. Perfect, I said. Harlan, she said, and her voice dropped a register. Once this is in motion, things are going to get ugly fast. When the cards stop working, when the gates won't open, they're going to panic. And they're going to come straight to you. I know that, I said. What will you tell them? She asked. Not a word, I said. I'm going to let them sit in it. Let them feel the pressure building from every direction, wondering why the whole world seems to have turned on them at once. And then tomorrow at the closing table, I'll give them every answer they've been looking for. I put the phone down. The sun had tracked across the sky to its noon position. The operation was complete. The blockade was total. I got up and moved to the window, looking out over the long drive, watching dust drift and settle in the midday light. Somewhere in Westport, Clifton was probably trying to cover a lunch tab. Standing at a card reader, puzzled, irritated, a flush of embarrassment starting to creep in. He'd call the bank, and he'd hit a wall. I'd already changed the security questions on the accounts. He'd call Renata, and she'd be dealing with the same dead ends. They'd tell each other it was a system glitch, a processing error, some bank hiccup that would sort itself out by morning. They wouldn't grasp yet that it was a reckoning. I walked to the kitchen and put together a sandwich. Ate it on my feet, the adrenaline running low and steady through me like a current. I had 24 hours left to hold the line, 24 hours to watch the panic spread from a safe distance. I checked the tracking app on my phone, the one that logged the family vehicles. Clifton's Range Rover was moving, headed in the direction of his office. Then it slowed. Then it reversed course entirely, now pointing toward the bank. I felt a smile come. Go ahead, Clifton. Storm into the bank. Put your fist on the counter. Insist on speaking to whoever is in charge. It won't change a thing. Management reports to the foundation now. And the foundation doesn't sit down with people who've stolen from their own family. I rinsed my plate and set it on the rack to dry. Everything was where it needed to be. The trap had been laid, the bait was moving, and the door had already closed. All I had to do was let the clock run down. Tomorrow I'd put on my finest suit. Tomorrow I'd look Garrett Dole in the eye across that table. Tomorrow I'd reclaim what was mine. But tonight I would sit in the quiet, that deep-weighted silence that only arrives when a long overdue debt is finally on its way to being settled. The restaurant was called Le Jardin. It was the sort of establishment where the menus carried no prices and the mineral water was sourced from glaciers that had since retreated into memory. It was Westport's flagship dining experience, not simply a meal, but a performance of affluence where the guests were as much on display as anything on the plate. And tonight, my son Clifton and his wife Renata were positioned at center stage. Or so they believed. I knew precisely where they were seated. Table 4, the prime position in the room, set against the floor-to-ceiling glass that framed the manicured courtyard and the valet lane beyond. I had that information because their reservation confirmation had surfaced in the family cloud account before I closed their access to it. They were hosting the Aldertons, a couple whose social endorsement Renata had spent 3 years maneuvering to secure. The Aldertons were old money established and insular, the gatekeepers of the summer gala committee. Pull off tonight, and Renata was in. I wasn't in the restaurant. I was in my darkened study, miles removed, watching the credit monitoring feed on my screen. But I could reconstruct the scene without any difficulty. I knew my son. I knew the particular shape of his pride, and I knew exactly how far he had to fall before he hit the floor. Clifton would be holding the table's attention, reclining slightly, returning a glass of the 1984 Burgundy he had certainly ordered as a statement, the bottle running $3,000. Laughing a half-beat too long at his own remarks, threading in references to his new arrangement with Garrett Dole, dropping words like leverage and asset allocation into the conversation, like a man who'd learned them from a magazine. Renata would be mirroring his performance smile, fixed and bright eyes making quiet circuits of the room, confirming that the right people were watching them dine with the Aldertons. They ordered without restraint. The transaction attempt registered in the banking alert system before the check ever reached their table. Foie gras, dry-aged prime rib, black truffle risotto, the kind of spread that cost more than most people's monthly housing. They were feasting in celebration, toasting the sale of my farm, before the deal had even been signed. The dinner ran 2 hours, 2 hours of my son performing the role of the generous magnate. 2 hours of Renata displaying herself like something rare and prized. They were intoxicated on the vapors of a victory that belonged to neither of them. Then the moment arrived. The bill. I pictured the waiter, a man named Luke, who had served me at that table more times than I could count, setting the black leather folder down with a measured, courteous nod. The total was $500–600. A breathtaking figure for a Tuesday evening, but to Clifton, it was abstract, just another digit to be swallowed by the bottomless account he believed was his birthright. He didn't glance at the number. The whole point was to look unbothered. He slipped his Platinum American Express inside the folder and returned it without so much as a break in his conversation with Mr. Alderton. "I've got this," he would have said. "Please, I insist." Luke carried the folder to the terminal near the kitchen. This was the moment. The invisible signal moved from the card reader through fiber optic lines, bounced off a satellite, and arrived at the fraud prevention server of the Foundation LLC. The server queried the account status. Status frozen, action decline, code 05. Do not honor. Luke came back to the table. The polite expression had gone. He bent close, keeping his voice low enough to spare what dignity remained. "Sir, the card has been declined. Perhaps a chip issue. Do you have another?" Clifton laughed. It came out nervous and disbelieving. "Declined. That's not possible. I booked flights to Paris on that card last week. Run it again." "I'm afraid the terminal is quite definitive, sir." Luke said, his tone cooling by a degree. The response reads, "Do not honor." Clifton's composure slipped. He could feel the Alderton's gaze settling on him. His hand moved to his jacket pocket, fingers not quite steady. "Here, try the Visa signature. $50,000 limit. It must be a glitch with Amex." Luke took the second card and walked away. The table fell silent. The easy chatter about summer homes and charity galas had simply stopped. Mrs. Alderton lifted her water glass and let her eyes travel elsewhere. The air had the specific suffocating weight that descends when money becomes an issue among people who have always had it. Luke returned more quickly this time. He didn't whisper. He placed the card on the tablecloth. "Declined, sir." The color that rose in Clifton's face matched the deep red of the drapes behind him. He pushed back his chair and got to his feet, his napkin tumbling to the floor. "This is absurd. Your system is malfunctioning. I am Clifton Mercer. My father is Harlan Mercer. Get your bank on the line." "We have already contacted Merchant Services," Luke said, and his voice had risen just enough for the neighboring tables to register. "The cards have been reported as lost or stolen. The issuer has directed us to retain them." "Stolen," Clifton sputtered. "I'm the one standing here." Renata broke in, her composure fracturing. She wrenched open her Chanel clutch with trembling hands, her lipstick rolling loose across the tablecloth. "Take mine, the joint card, just settle it, and let's go." She pressed the debit card forward. The lifeline. The account I had sealed that very morning. Luke regarded it without expression, then swiped it at the station. The terminal emitted a long, flat, high-pitched tone. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. It was the sound of a blade dropping. "Insufficient funds," Luke announced. A hush had spread through the restaurant. The assembled elite of Westport were watching. They were murmuring behind their menus. The performance had come apart, not slowly, but all at once, seam by seam. Clifton Mercer, the marketing visionary, the son of the celebrated engineer, unable to cover his own dinner. But the evening still had something left to deliver. One final blow arranged by my invisible hand. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, flashing amber lights suddenly washed across the courtyard. Blue and red strobes chased shadows across the white linen. A siren barked once short and sharp. Two heavy tow trucks rolled into the valet circle, their company markings visible to everyone in the room. They weren't making any effort at discretion. They sat blocking the entrance, diesel engines grinding at low idle. The valet pushed through the dining room doors. He was moving fast, scanning the room with wide eyes until he found Clifton. Mr. Mercer, you need to come outside right now." Clifton stared at him. What is it?" "They're hooking up the Rovers, sir. The driver has a repossession order. He's saying the leases are in default." No. Clifton abandoned the table, abandoned his guests, abandoned any remaining pretense of dignity. He lunged toward the window. Renata was right behind him, both palms pressed flat against the glass. Outside was a scene of cold, mechanical efficiency. A man in a reflective vest was working a hook beneath the undercarriage of Clifton's black Range Rover, moving with the unhurried expertise of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The car swung upward, its alarm cutting loose into the nightlights, strobing in frantic protest. Behind it, a second truck was already maneuvering toward Renata's white SUV. "Stop!" Clifton struck the glass with both fists. "You cannot touch that. That is my property." The dining room watched in rapt silence. It was more compelling than anything money could have put on a stage. This was the total public collapse of a man who had built everything on air. Mrs. Alderton rose from her seat, gathered her bag, and gave a small nod to her husband. No farewell? No offer to cover the bill? They moved to the side exit with quiet, practiced efficiency, putting as much space as possible between themselves and the wreckage of the evening. The restaurant manager, a severe man named Bastian, stepped squarely in front of Clifton, blocking his view of the window. "Mr. Mercer," Bastian said, crossing his arms. "The police have been called regarding the outstanding bill. If you have no other form of payment, I'll ask you to wait in the office. We cannot permit this scene to continue in the dining room." Renata let out a sob, raw and unguarded, nothing like the composed woman who had walked in 2 hours earlier. She looked around the room for a friendly face. She looked at the empty chairs where the Aldertons had been sitting. She looked at the couple at the next table, both of them suddenly absorbed in their phones. It landed on her, then perhaps for the first time she had no friends. She had only spectators. Clifton turned to Bastian. All the arrogance was gone. He looked diminished. He looked like a boy who'd lost sight of his parents in a crowded store. "I can call my father." Clifton's voice was unsteady. "My father will handle this. Just give me a minute." He pulled out his phone. He dialed my number. On my desk, the phone lit up with his photo on the screen. I watched it ring. 1, 2, 3, 4. The voicemail connected. "You have reached Harlan Mercer. I am not available at the moment. If this is an emergency, please hang up and handle it yourself." Clifton lowered the phone. Every trace of color had left his face. He turned back to the window. His car was gone. Renata's SUV hung at a 45-degree angle on the flatbed of the second truck. its alarm still screaming as the vehicle rolled away and the sound faded into the dark. They had no transportation. They had no money. They had nowhere left to hide. Bastian exhaled. "Your watches," he said, "and your driver's licenses. You may collect them tomorrow when you return with cash. For now, I need you to leave." The walk of shame was slow and excruciating. Clifton unclasped his Omega Seamaster, the one I had given him for his 30th birthday. Renata unhooked her diamond earrings. They set them on the tablecloth like tributes laid before a judgment they hadn't seen coming. Then they walked out through the front door to an empty curb and the indifferent night air. No valet, no car waiting. Their rideshare apps were tied to frozen accounts. So they walked. I sat in my study, the quiet of the room wrapping around me. I felt no joy. Revenge was never about joy. It is about restoring equilibrium. For years, they had moved through life walking over me without a second thought. Tonight they were walking home 6 miles in dress shoes. I lifted my glass. Not a $3,000 bottle. A $20 Merlot. It tasted like every dollar it was worth. The dinner from hell had ended. But the main course was still ahead. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow was the closing. If they believed tonight was the worst of it, they had badly miscalculated what was waiting for them in that conference room. Tonight I had taken away their toys. Tomorrow I would dismantle their world entirely. The walk back from the restaurant was a passage through territory Clifton had never crossed before. Route 1 was not built with pedestrians in mind. Certainly not pedestrians in Italian loafers and 4-inch stilettos. Cars hammered past at 50 miles an hour, headlights cutting through the dark and catching them full in the face, broadcasting the spectacle of the Mercer family making their way along the gravel shoulder. Each step marked another degree of the fall. Renata had stopped voicing her pain roughly 10 minutes back. Now she simply wept. Quietly, without performance, a steady run of tears pulling her mascara down her cheeks and spotting the silk of her blouse. She carried her shoes in one hand, bare feet on the cold asphalt. The woman who had looked at my 1996 Chevy Silverado with barely concealed contempt, as though the truck itself was evidence of a lesser life, was now walking in the gutter without her shoes on. Clifton was a few strides ahead of her, jabbing furiously at his phone screen, hunting for a workaround, a hidden door, some account I hadn't yet reached. The glow of the screen lit up his face in the darkness, the sheen of sweat on his brow, the raw terror behind his eyes. He had the look of a rat that had just discovered the maze was burning around it. I tracked their progress on the GPS feed from Clifton's phone. The dot crept along at an agonizing pace, still 3 miles from home. Then my phone rang. I had been expecting it. I was in my leather armchair, a glass of water on the coaster beside me, the room holding nothing but the warm glow of a reading lamp. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him sweating. I wanted him entertaining the thought that I might be asleep beyond reach, that he was out there on his own. On the 4th ring, I answered. "Hello, Dad?" Clifton's voice came through cracked and breathless. "Dad, thank God." I kept my tone even and mild, the voice of someone who had spent a peaceful evening with a book. "Clifton, it's late. Is something wrong?" "No, Dad. No, everything is not all right. Listen to me. There has been some massive error at the bank. Every card I have is dead. All of them, even the corporate accounts." "Is that right?" I said and took a quiet sip of water. "That sounds inconvenient." "Inconvenient, Dad. It's a catastrophe. We are stranded out here. We had dinner with the Aldertons, and the cards all failed. They towed the cars, Dad. They came right to the restaurant and took both rovers. I let the silence open up between us and held it there, letting him fill it with his own panic. They took the cars, I repeated slowly. Well, I suppose that follows when lease payments stop being made. I believe there was a notice about it sitting in the mail a few weeks back, and you told me you'd taken care of it. Said it was administrative? It is administrative, Clifton shouted into the phone. A truck hammered past him and swallowed part of what he said, leaving only the jagged edges of his desperation. It's a glitch, Dad, some system failure. I can't fix anything until the banks are open tomorrow morning. I need you to wire money right now. Enough to get us home and deal with the tow company. $5,000. Actually make it $10,000. Just to have a cushion. I settled back in the chair. The request had been completely predictable. Almost touching in its predictability. $10,000, I said. That's a significant sum to throw at a glitch, Clifton. Dad, please. Renata is walking along the highway without shoes. We've been humiliated. Just use the emergency account at Chase. I know it's there. I exhaled a long, heavy sound, the sigh of an old man at the end of a long day. I'm afraid I can't help with that, son. What do you mean you can't? You're always liquid. Always. Not anymore, I said. You see, Clifton, I've been sitting with something you said about my health. What? What does that have to do with anything? The party you arranged, I went on my voice picking up a vague, meandering quality. The one I wasn't invited to attend. You told people I was experiencing cognitive decline. You told the bank I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. Dad, that was purely for the loan paperwork. You know how these things work. Well, I took it seriously, I said. If I truly am losing my grip, then I have no business controlling large sums of money. It would be reckless. So I acted on your advice. I moved everything. Clifton stopped mid-stride. I could hear his breathing cut off entirely. Moved it where? Into a trust, I said. A blind trust overseen by an independent board. Tight restrictions. I cannot touch the principal without a unanimous vote of the directors. I'm certainly not in a position to wire 10,000 at 10 Zurs at night to a son who presents himself to the world as a millionaire. Dad, stop this. Stop playing games with me right now. This is a genuine emergency. It is not an emergency, Clifton. It is a consequence. That word just hung between us on the line. Consequence. It was a word that had never truly applied to him before, not in any way he'd felt in his bones. He had always understood consequences as something that befell other people, careless people, unlucky people, people who didn't know how to work the system. Dad, hear me out, he hissed, his voice dropping low and sharp. Well, if you don't transfer that money, I swear to God, you swear what I cut in, and the soft, wandering quality dropped out of my voice entirely. It went flat and cold. What exactly are you threatening, Clifton? Another forged signature, perhaps. Another piece of my property sold out from under me. The line went dead quiet. The particular silence of a man who has just realized he's been seen. He'd believed he was operating in the dark. He hadn't known the lights were on the whole time. You know, he breathed. I know that you are selling the farm to Garrett Dole tomorrow, I said. I know about the rezoning application. I know about the patent transfer. I know all of it, Clifton. Dad, wait. I can explain. It is a business arrangement. It benefits the whole family. We stand to make millions. I was going to bring you in on it. I was going to make it a surprise. You certainly managed to surprise me, I said. But here is where things stand, son. The banks are closed. My accounts are locked. And you are on the side of a highway in the middle of the night. Please, Dad. Renata's feet are bleeding. We can't make it home on foot. Then walk faster, I said. Dad. And Clifton? I let my voice drop to barely above a whisper, one more thing. What he choked out. Keep moving. The night air will do you good. But watch yourself when you reach the bridge. The shoulder narrows there, and I would not want anything to happen to you before our meeting tomorrow." I ended the call, set the phone face down on the desk. My hand had a slight tremor, not fear, but the residual current of the kill. I had severed the last line. I had let him know that I knew his secret, but I had held back the critical piece. He didn't know about the foundation. He didn't know I owned his debt. I left him in the dark, in every sense of the word. Now his own mind would take over the work. Every step of those remaining 3 miles would be its own torment. Every pair of headlights approaching from behind would look like a police cruiser. He'd be turning over what I knew and what else I might know, and whether Garrett Dole had heard anything. He wouldn't sleep. He would pace his unlit house, afraid even to switch on a lamp, half convinced the power would be the next thing cut. He'd try to build a plan, but a mind trained on shortcuts and easy exits would keep stalling out. He would land on the closing as his only remaining move. If he could get to that table, if he could get Dole's money in hand, he could straighten everything out. He could reimburse me. He could buy my silence. He would grip that deal the way a drowning man grips the thing that's pulling him under. And that was exactly where I needed him. I rose from the chair and crossed to the window. The moon was up, washing the farm's fields in a pale, even light. Tomorrow those fields would be the ground of the confrontation. Tomorrow my son would try to sell the thing I'd built my life around. I glanced at the clock. 11 p.m. I walked to the closet and took out my suit. Not the gray one I reserved for church, the black one. The one I put on when I used to walk into boardrooms to end people's employment. I smoothed the lapels, checked the buttons. I was ready. The phone rang again. Clifton. I let it run to voicemail. It rang again, and again after that. I silenced the ringer. I went to the kitchen and made a sandwich for Drew. He'd be coming over after school in the morning. I wanted real food waiting for him, not the catered, decorator-approved nonsense his parents kept in the house. As I cut the bread, I let my mind stay with Clifton out there on that road. I hoped it hurt. I hoped each step recalled in some bone-deep way what it had taken to build everything he was trying to sell. I hoped the darkness put a real fear in him, because when the sun came up, he would look back on the dark and wish he'd stayed in it. The light waiting for him on Friday morning was the kind that burns secrets down to nothing. The sun broke over the farm on Friday with a hard, stripping clarity. No soft edges, no forgiving shadows, just the kind of morning light that leaves nowhere for anything hidden to breathe. I was already on the porch swing, both hands around a mug of black coffee, watching the dust motes turn slowly in the air. Inside, Drew was still stretched out on the sofa, asleep, safe, unaware of what the day held. I had told him to stay home from school. I told him there was going to be a family meeting, and I wanted him to see the truth with his own eyes. Not the polished, carefully edited version his parents had always handed him. At 8:00 the taxi pulled up. It was a battered yellow sedan that rattled at idle, stopped at the far end of my long driveway. It couldn't come any closer. The heavy chain and hardened steel padlock I'd put in place were doing exactly what I'd installed them to do. I watched the back doors swing open. Clifton and Renata climbed out. They had the look of people who had survived something that hadn't been worth surviving. The same clothes from the evening before, every trace of polish ground off them. Clifton's suit was creased and blotched with sweat. His tie was nowhere in sight. Renata was barefoot, one hand clutching her expensive heels, the hem of her silk dress torn, ragged. Her hair, ordinarily lacquered into place, hung limp and fraying around her face. They didn't appear humbled. They didn't appear sorry. They appeared enraged. The taxi driver had words with them for a moment, pressing no doubt for cash they no longer possessed. Clifton flung his watch through the open window, the Omega Seamaster I had given him, and the cab peeled away, throwing up a spray of gravel as it went. They turned to face the house. When Clifton spotted the chain on the gate, he drove his foot into it. A raw animal cry of frustration tore out of him, scattering a row of crows from the telephone lines above. "Dad, open this gate. Open it right now." I did not move. I raised my coffee mug and took a slow sip. They were going to have to climb. It was not a dignified sight. My son, who fancied himself a real estate visionary, and his wife the aspiring socialite, clambering over a farm gate like a pair of trespassers caught in the act. Renata caught her dress on the wire and tore a long strip from it. She swore at a volume that would have made the Aldertons reach for their smelling salts. They came up the driveway at a march propelled by equal parts exhaustion and wounded pride. Drawing closer, I could make out the panic flickering just beneath the surface of their skin. They were running on the last fumes. The closing with Garrett Dole was 4 hours away. They needed those papers signed to get the money to undo the damage, though they still believed it was a banking malfunction, not a demolition job. They thundered up the porch steps. I stayed right where I was on the swing. "Dad, what in the hell is the matter with you?" Clifton's face was inches from mine. He carried the smell of stale wine and a sleepless night. "Why is the gate locked? Why have you been ignoring your phone? Do you have any idea what we went through out there?" We walked Dad, 6 miles in the dark. I looked him over slowly, top to bottom. A little exercise never hurt the heart, Clifton. "Don't you dare bring up health!" Renata snapped. She shouldered past him, eyes blazing. "You did this, Harlan. I know it was you. You called the bank. You invented some story about fraud and had our accounts locked. How could you do that to us? We have a child. We have obligations." I set my coffee mug down on the railing with a quiet click. "I didn't lock your accounts over a story, Renata. I locked them because you stole from me." Clifton's face flickered. The anger shifted in an instant, replaced by something smoother and more dangerous, that slick, practiced condescension. The gaslighting engine turned over and started. "Stole, Dad. Nobody stole a thing. You're confused. This is precisely what we've been worried about. You're forgetting. You signed all the paperwork yourself. You handed me the power of attorney. You asked me to manage the trust because you were concerned about your own memory. Don't you remember any of this?" I held his gaze without a word. He was lying with such absolute certainty that for one brief moment, just a flicker, I grasped how he had operated this long. He didn't only lie to others. He had convinced himself. "I never asked you to empty Drew's college fund," I said, keeping my voice level. "We didn't empty it," Clifton shot back, gesturing broadly. "We repositioned it. It's an investment strategy, a higher yield vehicle so the money would compound faster. We did it for Drew. We did it for you." "So for me," I said. "For you." Renata jumped in, her voice climbing. "Harlan, look at this place. It is coming apart at the seams. You cannot run a farm at your age. We took out the loan on the property to get it into shape, to make it marketable, so we could find you a proper facility where you'd be looked after. We are trying to protect you from yourself, and this is how you repay us. You're ill, Harlan. You're paranoid, and you are punishing the people who care about you most." It was a masterwork of manipulation. In the story they had written for themselves, they were the selfless ones. The exhausted, devoted caregivers managing a senile, ungrateful old man. They had wound themselves so tightly in that fiction that stealing from me had become a form of charity. "The closing is at noon, Dad," Clifton said, dropping his voice to something low and urgent. "Just listen. This can all be resolved. Call the bank, tell them it was a misunderstanding, free up the accounts. If we don't arrive with the funds to cover the closing costs, the deal collapses. And if the deal collapses, everyone loses. This arrangement with Dole is going to set this family up for life. Drew's tuition, your retirement, all of it. Garrett Dole, I said. You are selling my land to Garrett Dole. Clifton flinched. He hadn't anticipated me saying the name out loud. He's a different man now, Dad. He respects everything you built. He wants to honor what this land represents. Honor it, I said. I got to my feet, the porch swing creaking behind me. By flattening my home and pouring concrete for a strip mall. By stripping out my patents and moving them to whoever handed him the lowest offer. Who fed you that line? Clifton's eyes swept the yard as if someone might be listening from behind the fence posts. That is not true. Someone has been working on you, filling your head with things that aren't real. Your thinking isn't right. I am thinking more clearly than I have in a long time, I said. Renata came forward. She seized my arm, her fingernails pressing into my skin. Stop being selfish about this, Harlan. This isn't your decision to make alone. It's about the whole family. Unlock those accounts right now, or we lose the house on Sycamore Lane. Is that what you want, your grandson out on the street? You'd let that happen out of spite. You are a bitter old man choosing a patch of dirt over your own blood. You speak about family, I said, pulling free of her grip. But family wasn't on the guest list at the party. You talk about Drew as though you're protecting him, but you dressed him up as a prop. That was a mistake, Clifton shouted. We said we were sorry. Why are you still holding on to it? Why do you have to destroy everything over a grudge that means nothing? They kept coming. Wave after wave, battering at my composure the way water batters stone. Had I been less certain, had I not held the documents in my own hands, I might have given way. I might have started to believe I was the one doing the damage. But I had the evidence. I had the truth laid out in black and white. I am not destroying anything I said. I am simply watching what was already broken finish its fall. Clifton dragged a hand across his forehead. He glanced at his bare wrist where the watch used to sit. Dad, please. We are almost out of time. Write a check. Give us access for one day, just 24 hours. The moment Dole's money clears, we pay you back twice over. I swear it on Mom's grave. Don't you put her name in your mouth, I said. My voice came out like a crack of a board, snapping. Both of them went still. Clifton actually stepped back, caught off guard by the force of it. You want money? I asked. Yes, he managed. Yes, just enough to clear the hold. I reached into my jacket pocket. I drew out a folded piece of paper. Not a check. It was the foreclosure notice Audra had drafted, printed out fresh that morning. I opened it and held it out. Here is what I have for you, I said. Clifton grabbed it from my hand. His eyes moved across the page. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He read it a second time, then a third. What is this? He stammered. The Foundation LLC. Who are they? Why do they hold the deed? Renata snatched the paper from him. She scanned it, and the color drained out of her face entirely. Foreclosure. But we have 30 days. The bank told us we have 30 days. The bank sold the note, I said, keeping my voice even. The foundation owns your mortgage now. They have invoked the acceleration clause on grounds of fraudulent activity. You don't have 30 days. You have until noon. Noon, Clifton breathed. That's the same time as the closing. Quite a coincidence, I said. Or perhaps it's something closer to justice. You know them, Renata screamed, grabbing 2 fistfuls of my jacket lapels. You know who runs this foundation. You have to get them to stop. Tell them we'll pay after the deal closes. Tell them. I looked down at her hands on my jacket. I looked into her eyes, frantic, grasping, cornered. I can't get them to stop Renata. Why not? She cried. Because the decision has already been made. And they don't sit across the table from people who fabricate a dementia diagnosis to rob their own parents. Clifton stood there staring at me. The machinery behind his eyes was grinding, trying to force the pieces into some shape that made sense. He looked at the paper. He looked at my face. He read the steadiness in the way I was standing. Dad, he whispered, and something like the first light of a terrible understanding moved across his features. Who runs the foundation? I said nothing. I didn't need to. At that moment, the front door of the farmhouse swung open behind me. The screen door banged shut. Drew stepped out onto the porch wearing his graduation gown. I'd asked him to put it on. Standing there, he looked like a man, not the boy I used to carry on my shoulders. The Patek Philippe watch was clenched in his fist. Renata gasped. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school. Drew studied his parents, the torn clothes, the desperation carved into their faces. His eyes dropped to the foreclosure notice in Renata's hand. I live here now, Drew said. His voice didn't waver. Grandpa invited me since you two were so busy draining my college fund, you forgot I existed. Drew, baby, listen to me. Renata was already pulling on her motherly mask. Grandpa is getting confused. Everything we've done has been for you. Stop it, Mom, Drew said. Just stop. I heard everything. I heard you out there. You didn't come to see me, you came for money. Clifton stepped toward him. Drew, hand me the watch. It's worth something. We can pawn it, cover the closing costs. Give it here. He reached out for his son. He reached for the last thing of value I'd placed in that boy's hands. That was the moment words became useless. That was the moment it turned physical. I stepped between them. My hand went flat against Clifton's chest. Don't touch him, I said. Clifton shoved me a wild, flailing push born of desperation, but it caught me off balance. I stumbled back into the porch railing. Get out of my way, old man, Clifton bellowed. He made a lunge for Drew. Something ignited in me. Every year of patience, every quiet sacrifice gone in an instant. I wasn't his father in that moment. I was the wall standing between my grandson and harm. I planted my feet, grabbed Clifton by the lapels of his ruined jacket, and used the same momentum he'd taught me when we wrestled in the yard 30 years ago. I twisted, pulled hard, and sent my son off that porch. He hit the dirt of the flower bed squarely on top of the gardenias. He groaned, rolling onto his side, clutching his ribs. Renata screamed. I stood at the top of the stairs, breathing hard, straightening my cuffs. Get off my property, I said. Not a request this time. A declaration of war. The gaslighting was finished. The fire was burning, and they were standing right in the middle of it. The silence after my son struck the ground was total. The birds went quiet. The wind seemed to stop moving. Even Renata, who had a scream ready for every occasion, stood frozen, mouth open, staring at her husband sprawled among the crushed gardenias. I stood on that porch, hands still raised, chest heaving, and looked down at my palms. Calloused, rough as gravel, the hands of a man who had built bridges over raging rivers. Clifton's hands, currently wrapped around his bruised ribs, were smooth. Hands that had never gripped anything heavier than a golf club or a fountain pen. The difference between us in that moment wasn't just a matter of generations. It ran deeper than that. I was forged from iron and earth. He was constructed from paper and pretense. Clifton groaned, rolling to his side. Dirt was smeared across his expensive dress shirt. He spat out a mouthful of soil. He looked up at me, and for the first time in his life I didn't find arrogance in his eyes. I found shock. He couldn't make sense of it. The old man, the quiet financier, the doormat he'd wiped his feet on for 40 years, had just physically rejected him. You assaulted me," Clifton wheezed, pushing himself to his knees, his voice tangled up in pain and disbelief. "You crazy old man. I could have you arrested. I could have you locked up." "Then call them," I said, voice low, steady as a diesel engine idling. "Call the police, Clifton. Let them come. Let them see the foreclosure notice in your hand. Let them see the trespassers on my land. Let them see the man who forged a medical document to rob his own father. Go ahead and make that call." Clifton went still. He knew he couldn't. The last thing he wanted was police involvement. Renata rushed over, brushing dirt from his jacket with frantic, jerky hands. "Are you okay? Oh God, look at your suit. Harlan, have you lost your mind? You could have killed him." I didn't answer her. I turned to Drew. My grandson stood near the door, face drained of color. He was gripping the Patek Philippe watch so hard his knuckles had gone white. He looked from his father in the dirt to me. "Go inside, Drew," I said quietly. "You don't need to witness this." "No," Drew said. I looked at him, caught off guard. The boy who usually disappeared to his room and buried himself in headphones whenever things got ugly was holding his ground. He moved forward, stepping down the first stair. "No, Grandpa. I'm not going inside. I'm not a kid anymore." "Drew, honey," Renata said, her voice dropping into that manipulative softness. "Please just give Daddy the watch. We need to leave. We have a meeting. This is all just a misunderstanding. We'll get you a new watch, a better one, an Apple Watch. Just let us have the old one so we can sort this out." Drew looked at his mother. It was a look of profound disappointment. Not anger, pity. And that pity landed harder on Renata than any slap could have. "It's not about the watch, Mom." Drew's voice cracked, then steadied itself. "You still don't understand, do you? You're trying to sell Grandpa's farm. You're trying to sell his patents. And you're using my college fund to cover your gambling debts." Clifton scrambled upright. "Who told you that?" He jabbed a shaking finger in my direction. "He filled your head with lies. He's turning you against us." "I saw the bank statements, Dad," Drew shouted. The rawness in his voice bounced off the barn walls. "I saw the emails on your iPad. You left it sitting unlocked on the kitchen counter last week. I saw the emails from Mr. Dole. I saw the emails from the casino. I saw all of it." The revelation hit Clifton like something solid. He stumbled back a step. His own son knew everything. The carefully maintained image, successful businessman, role model, provider was in pieces on the ground. Drew pressed on, tears running freely. "I was so proud of you, Dad. I used to tell my friends my dad was a marketing genius." He shook his head. "But you're just a liar. You stole from Grandpa. You stole from me. And now you want to take this watch. This is the only thing I have that's actually real." "Shut up," Clifton screamed. The vein along his neck stood out sharp. "Shut your mouth, you ungrateful little brat. I gave you everything: private schools, tutors, camps. You think that came free? You think money just appears? I did what I had to do to survive." "You didn't do it for me," Drew shouted back. "You did it for yourself, so you could brag to your buddies at the club." That was the breaking point. The truth was too bright, too scalding. Clifton snapped. Whatever thin veneer of civility remained dissolved, leaving nothing but a cornered, vicious animal. "Give me the watch," Clifton roared. He lunged not at me, At Drew, it unfolded in slow motion. I watched my son, a grown man of 40, charge at his own teenage boy with violence in his eyes. He wasn't reaching out to embrace him. He was reaching to take to hurt, to silence the voice that had been speaking the truth. Renata screamed behind her hands. Drew flinched, throwing his arms up to shield his face, but Clifton never reached him. I moved. No thought, no calculation. I simply moved. My body recalled the leverage and torque of the construction site without being asked. I came off the porch and cut across Clifton's path. As his hand shot out toward Drew, I caught his wrist. My grip locked around his forearm like a steel vise. I felt his pulse hammering beneath my thumb. I felt the softness of his skin, the weakness beneath it. I didn't just hold him. I twisted. A basic principle of mechanics torque. I rotated his arm outward, forcing the shoulder joint to lock, forcing his body to obey the pain. Clifton yelped a high, sharp sound of pure shock. He tried to pull free, but I stepped into him, driving him backward with my shoulder. I slammed him against the rough wooden pillar of the porch. The impact shook the roof. Dust sifted down from the eaves. I held him there. My left forearm pressed across his chest, just below his throat, enough to restrict his breathing, enough to panic him, but not enough to do real damage. My right hand kept his wrist locked behind his back. "Dad, stop, you're breaking my arm." Clifton shrieked, his face mashed against the wood. I leaned in until my face was inches from his ear. I could smell the fear rising off him. It smelled sour. We are standing right at the edge of it now, the moment when everything I had quietly built behind the scenes was about to come into the open. What happened next cost more than I expected, and not just in legal terms. Before we get there, tell me, if someone you trusted had been moving against you in secret, would you confront them the moment you found out, or would you watch, and let the truth do the work? If you ever, I hissed, my voice trembling with a rage that frightened even me, if you ever raise a hand to that boy again, I will break more than your arm. I will dismantle you, Clifton. Do you hear me? I tightened my grip. Do you understand? Yes, yes, let go. I held him there for another 5 seconds. I needed him to feel the helplessness. I needed him to know what it was like to be at someone else's mercy. I wanted it absolutely clear that the only reason he was still upright was because I was permitting it. Then I let go. Clifton collapsed to the ground, clutching his arm, gulping for air. He looked up at me with naked terror. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten that before I became a retiree in a cardigan, I was the man who cleared forests and moved mountains. He had read my patience as weakness. I straightened my jacket. I looked at Renata. She was shaking, watching me as if I'd turned into something monstrous. "Get him up," I said, my voice flat. Renata hurried forward and hauled Clifton to his feet. He was sobbing, deep, humiliating sobs from a beaten man. "You have 1 hour before your meeting with Garrett Dole," I said, reading the sun's position in the sky. "You have no money. You have no car. You have no dignity." I reached into my pocket and drew out a set of keys. Not the Range Rover's keys. The keys to my old tractor sitting by the barn. It was a battered, loud diesel-belching machine from 1978. "Take the tractor," I said. "What?" Renata whispered, horrified. "It's the only vehicle on this property that isn't locked," I said. "If you want to make that clean, if you want to go beg Garrett Dole for mercy, take the tractor. It tops out at 15 miles an hour. Leave now, and you might just get there in time." "Dad, you can't be serious," Clifton whimpered, cradling his arm. "Drive a tractor to the office park." "That or walk," I said. "And Clifton." He looked at me, eyes swollen and red. When you get there, don't lose sleep over the closing costs. The foundation will be present. He froze. The foundation. Go, I barked before I thought better of it, and reached for the phone to call the sheriff. They didn't argue. They were broken. Clifton limped toward the barn, Renata trailing behind, glancing back at the house, at the life, at the son she had just lost for good. A moment later, the tractor rumbled to life in a cloud of black exhaust. I stood and watched as my son and his wife, the would-be royalty of Westport, mounted the rusted metal seat of a farm vehicle. They lurched down the driveway, the engine backfiring, a slow and thunderous procession of shame heading out toward the main road. I turned to Drew. He was still on the porch steps, gripping the watch. He was shaking. I crossed over to him and pulled him close. He pressed his face into my shoulder and wept. He was crying for the loss of his parents, not because they were gone, but because he had finally seen them clearly for the first time. "It's okay, kid," I murmured, my hand moving through his hair. "It's over. The rot has been cut out. Now we can build something." I watched the distant smear of black smoke fade down the road. The physical fight was behind us, but the war wasn't finished. The final act was waiting in a conference room 10 miles away. I went inside, picked up my car keys, and moved. I had a meeting to get to, and I had no intention of being late. The closing was about to start, and I was arriving with a sledgehammer. I swung my sedan into the lot at Harrington Office Park. It was the usual sterile expanse of glass and concrete, the kind of place where dreams came to be filed in triplicate or fed through a shredder. In the middle of the visitor section, sitting like an open wound on the spotless asphalt, was my old, battered tractor, still ticking with heat. A security guard circled it slowly, scratching his head, plainly baffled by how a piece of agricultural machinery from the last century had found its way into his domain. I walked past him, adjusting my tie. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor. The doors parted on the reception area of Pinnacle Realty Group. The air smelled of expensive leather and curated intimidation. The receptionist moved to intercept me, but I didn't break stride. I walked straight to the double oak doors at the far end of the hall. I didn't knock. I pushed them open and stepped into the climate-controlled stillness. The scene inside was a portrait of disaster. Garrett Dole sat at the head of a broad mahogany table. He looked impatient, glancing at his gold watch. Across from him sat Clifton and Renata. They were something to see. Tractor dust had settled across their faces. Renata's hair was a wind-ravaged tangle. Clifton was nursing his injured arm, the shoulder of his suit jacket torn clean open. The smell of diesel and desperation came off them in waves. When I walked in, the air changed. Clifton lurched to his feet, knocking his chair back. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Dole looked up at me. His eyes sharpened. He recognized me without hesitation. The last time we'd crossed paths, I'd been the one walking him off a bridge site with police at my side. He didn't smile. He leaned back and laced his fingers together. "Harlan Mercer." Dole said, his voice like gravel being ground underfoot. "I was told you were in a nursing home. I was told you were drooling on yourself. You look remarkably sharp for an invalid." I moved to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and set my briefcase down. It landed with a solid, deliberate thud against the wood. "Remarkable recovery, Garrett," I said. "Happened just in time for me to look over the paperwork on this transaction." Renata shot to her feet, her face flooded with panic. "You have no right to be here. This is a private meeting. Garrett, make him leave. He's legally incompetent. We have the documentation." She was still trying to play a hand that had already been folded. She reached into her bag, yanked out the forged power of attorney, and slapped it on the table. "There," she said, her voice climbing. "We have the authority. He's confused. Sign the check, Garrett. Let's get this done. Dole looked at the document. Then he looked at me. He was a predator, and predators read a shift in the wind before anyone else does. He didn't pick up a pen. I opened my briefcase. No hurry. I let every second stretch out and press down on them. I removed a thick black binder and slid it across the table toward Dole. Before you sign anything, Garrett, I'd suggest you examine Exhibit A. What am I looking at? Dole asked, flipping it open. A forensic handwriting analysis, I said. Conducted by the state's top expert yesterday afternoon. It lays the signature on that power of attorney against my actual signature, pulled from notarized documents spanning the last 10 years. I let my gaze settle on Clifton. The color had drained from his face beneath the layer of road dust. The conclusion is on page 4, I continued. The signature is a tracing and a clumsy one at that. It mirrors a document from 1997 and down to a microscopic tremor in the ink flow. That document is a forgery, Garrett. And under Connecticut law, deploying a forged instrument to transfer real property is a Class B felony. Dole looked up from the page. His expression had gone dark. He turned to Clifton. Is this true? No. Clifton stammered. It's a lie. He's lying. I reached into the briefcase again. A digital recorder. I pressed play. The voice that came out was impossible to mistake. It was Renata's, captured by the security system in my kitchen, while she believed I was napping 3 weeks ago. We just need to get the old man to sign the blank form. Tell him it's for his medical insurance. Once we have the signature, we can fill in whatever we need. We take the house, the accounts, everything. He's too stupid to notice. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was dense enough to flatten bone. Renata made a sound like a wounded animal. She dropped back into her chair, both hands pressed over her mouth. Every trace of defiance was gone. Every bit of aggression had evaporated. What remained was cold, trembling terror. Her eyes cut to the door, measuring the distance, weighing whether she could run. But I wasn't finished. I brought out the bank records. Here are the wire transfers, I said, pushing the papers toward Dole. $250,000 from my grandson's education trust, transferred directly to your company, Garrett. But here's where it becomes your problem. Since the power of attorney is void, those funds constitute stolen property. If you proceed with this land deal today, you are knowingly taking part in money laundering. Dole slammed the binder shut. He rose from his chair, face darkening to purple. He fixed his gaze on Clifton. You idiot, Dole hissed. You told me you had clean title. You told me the old man was a vegetable. You just walked me into a felony. You brought the FBI to my door. Clifton was shaking his head, tears cutting through the grime on his face. Mr. Dole, please. I didn't know. We can fix this. Just give us the money. We'll pay him off. We'll get him to sign a new one. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound with nothing warm in it. You can't pay me off, Clifton, because you don't have any money. I stood and delivered the final blow, the one that would crack their world at its foundation. I reached into the briefcase one last time. I drew out the deed. But not the deed they were expecting. It was the assignment of mortgage. You see, Garrett, I said, turning to my old adversary. You can't purchase the farm from Clifton because Clifton doesn't hold the equity. The bank carried the note, and as of yesterday, that note was sold to a private holding company, the Foundation LLC. I looked at Renata. Her eyes had gone wide, a dawning horror spreading across her face. She recognized the name from the foreclosure notice. The Foundation. She breathed. You are the Foundation. I nodded. I own the debt, Renata. I hold the mortgage on your house in Westport. I hold the liens on your vehicles. I own the credit card balances you ran up through this man's fraudulent investment firm. All of it. I turned back to Clifton. So here is where things stand. The foreclosure on your house is active, effective immediately. The police are currently working through the forgery evidence I forwarded to the district attorney this morning. And Mr. Dole here, I'd expect he's about to show you the door before he finds himself charged as a co-conspirator. Renata began to cry. Not the practiced weeping she deployed to get her way. This was the real thing, ugly heaving sobs from a woman watching her entire life turn to ash. She grabbed Clifton's arm and dug her nails in. "You said you had it handled," she screamed, shaking him. "You said he was stupid. You said we'd be rich. Now we're going to prison." "I can't go to prison." "Clifton, I look terrible in orange." She swung toward me, her face streaked with tears and grime. "Harlan, please." "Dad, I didn't mean it. It was Clifton's idea. He pushed me into it. He said you owed us." "I love you, Harlan. I have always loved you. Please don't send us to prison. Think of Drew." I looked at her steadily. I looked at the woman who had barred me from my grandson's graduation, the woman who had laughed in my face when she told me I wasn't invited. "I am thinking of Drew," I said. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. So he never becomes you." Garrett Dole picked up the phone on the conference table. "Security!" he snapped. "Get up here now. I have 2 trespassers to remove and call the police. I want to report an attempted fraud." Clifton dropped to his knees. "Mr. Dole, please." "Get out!" Dole roared. "Get out of my office before I throw you through the window." I picked up my briefcase. I snapped the latches shut. The sound cracked through the room like a pistol shot. I walked to the door. I didn't look back at my son weeping on the carpet. I didn't look back at Renata, who was gasping for breath. I stepped out into the hallway. Behind me came the shouting, the rising chaos. But inside me there was only a deep, settled quiet. The truth was in the open. The lies had been put down. The foundation had held. I rode the elevator down. I had one more stop to make. The police station. Not to turn myself in to finish what I'd set in motion. The automatic doors parted, and I walked out into the hard glare of the midday sun. The heat rising off the pavement was fierce, but nothing against the firestorm I had just left behind in Garrett Dole's conference room. I moved to the curb and stood. I didn't have to wait long. The sirens reached me first, a low wail in the distance that swelled fast into a deafening wall of sound. 2 cruisers swept into the lot lights, strobing blue and red. They didn't ease into visitor spaces. They pulled straight to the front entrance and blocked the exit. I watched Detective Kowalski climb out of the lead car. I knew Kowalski. No nonsense, 20 years working fraud. Audra had put the evidence packet on his desk at 9:00 that morning. He met my eyes and gave a short, businesslike nod. He wasn't here for conversation. He was here for an arrest. A moment later, the revolving doors spun open again. Clifton and Renata stumbled out, nudged from behind by Garrett Dole's private security. They looked like survivors washing up after a shipwreck. Clifton clutched his injured arm, face smeared with dirt and tears. Renata was trying to smooth her torn dress, eyes darting everywhere like a creature that knew it was cornered. When the police cars registered, they both stopped cold. "Officer," Renata cried, stabbing a trembling finger back at the building. "That man in there assaulted us. Garrett Dole threatened us. You need to arrest him." Detective Kowalski walked toward them, one hand resting easy on his belt. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, measured and firm. "We're not here for Mr. Dole. We're here for you and your husband." "Me," Renata gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in a performance of pure innocence. I haven't done anything. I'm the victim in all of this. Kowalski unfolded a paper from his jacket. We have a warrant for the arrest of Clifton Mercer for forgery, bank fraud, and grand larceny. And we have a warrant for you, Renata Mercer, for conspiracy and aiding and abetting a felony. Clifton's legs gave way. He sank against a concrete planter and sobbed into his hands. A miserable sight. The man who had fancied himself a king was now just a frightened child bracing for a timeout that would run 10 years. But Renata didn't sink. Renata switched modes. I caught the change behind her eyes, immediate and cold. The fear dropped away, and something reptilian took its place. She looked at Clifton huddled on the ground. Then she looked at the handcuffs Kowalski was unclipping from his belt. She turned to me. "Harlan," she said, her voice dropping to a quick, urgent whisper. "Harlan, you can stop this. You know I never signed those papers. It was Clifton. All of it was Clifton. He made me go along with it. I was afraid of him." I looked at her. I heard her voice again in my memory, the recording her plotting to strip me of my house. I remembered her laughing about the party. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and produced a single sheet of paper. No get-out-of-jail card. Something far more significant. Audra had prepared this document for exactly this contingency. It was a voluntary termination of parental rights. I stepped toward her. The officers held still, watching. "Renata," I said, "I can't touch the fraud charges. You broke the law. But I can speak to the district attorney. I can tell him you cooperated. I can tell him you were an unwilling participant. That could mean the difference between 5 years inside and probation." Her eyes lit up at once. "Yes. Yes, tell him that. I will cooperate fully. I'll give them everything." There's a price," I said. "Anything," she whispered. I raised the paper. "You sign this. Right now. It grants full permanent legal custody of Drew to me. You relinquish all visitation rights. You surrender any claim to his future, his trust fund, his life. You walk away, Renata. You leave my grandson alone. Forever." She looked at the paper. Then she looked at the back of the police cruiser. It wasn't a difficult choice for her. No hesitation. No tearful thought spared for her son. Only the bone-deep selfishness that had governed her entire life. "Do you have a pen?" she asked. I handed her my fountain pen. She took it. She pressed the paper flat against the hood of the police car. In the wash of the flashing blue lights, she signed her name. She signed away her only child to spare herself. She handed it back. "Done," she said. "Now tell them I'm innocent." I folded the document and tucked it into my pocket. It felt heavy, not from the paper, but from the weight of the tragedy it carried. "Detective Kowalski," I said. "Mrs. Mercer has agreed to turn state's evidence against her husband. She maintains she was coerced." Kowalski looked at Renata with unconcealed contempt, then gave a slow nod. "We'll take her statement downtown, but she still comes in for booking." "Understood," I said. "But at least she won't be coming back to my house." Kowalski turned to his partner. "Cuff him." The partner pulled Clifton up from the planter. He was limp, barely able to hold himself upright. He looked at Renata. He saw her standing separate from him, arms folded, face turned away. "Renata," Clifton croaked. "Renata, what are you doing? We're in this together, aren't we?" Renata didn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on the empty parking lot ahead. "You lied to me, Clifton," she said, her voice stripped of everything warm. "You said you had the money. You said you had the power. You are nothing, and I am not going to prison for a loser." Clifton screamed. It tore through the thick afternoon air. Not a scream of anger, the sound of something breaking inside a person. He understood in that instant that the woman he had betrayed his father for the woman he had sold his soul to impress had never loved him. Not once. She had loved the life he financed. Now that the life was gone, he was just ballast to be cut loose. The officers put Clifton in the back of the first cruiser. He pressed his face to the window, weeping, watching his wife standing on the sidewalk. Detective Kowalski opened the rear door of the second car for Renata. She got in with a strange, disconnected poise, as though she were stepping into a car service. She believed she had come out ahead. She believed she had outplayed the system. She hadn't grasped that by putting her name on that paper, she had surrendered the only thing that could have ever made her life mean something. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the cars pull away. I tracked the flashing lights until they dissolved into the flow of traffic on the main road. Clifton was headed to prison. Renata was headed toward a life of isolation and legal proceedings. And I was standing there with my grandson's freedom folded in my pocket. It was finished. The poisoned branch had been cut from the tree. The wound would need time, but the infection had been removed. I walked to my car. My hands were trembling just slightly. I wasn't happy. No father is happy to be the one who puts his son in handcuffs. But I felt relief, deep and genuine. I had done the hard thing. I had done the necessary thing. I got in and started the engine. I needed to get home. Drew was waiting. And for the first time in 18 years, I didn't need anyone's permission to be his grandfather. I checked the rearview mirror one last time. The office park sat still and quiet. The battered old tractor remained in the lot, a monument to the day the earth took back what belonged to it. I put the car in drive. It was time to go home and plant something new. The gardenias beneath the porch have come back into bloom. They are resilient flowers, much like the people who tend them. 3 months have passed since the sirens faded from that parking lot. 3 months since quiet returned to the farm, but it's a different quiet now. Not the quiet of loneliness, the quiet of peace. Drew is in the driveway loading the trunk of my old sedan. He leaves for college tomorrow. Not the Ivy League school his mother had her heart set on for the sake of a bumper sticker. He's going to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute to study civil engineering. He wants to understand how things are constructed. He wants to learn how to build things that last. He earned his place on his own merit, and his tuition is secured by the irrevocable trust I set up the day his father tried to sell him out. I watched him hoist a heavy box of books. He's filled out these past few months. The farm work has done him good. His hands have calluses on them now, same as mine. He knows how to mend a fence. He knows how to change the oil in a tractor. He knows the worth of $1 because he's had to earn his sweat for it and treat it with respect. I visited Clifton yesterday. The state correctional facility is a gray, soulless structure that strips a man of his pretenses faster than any bankruptcy filing ever could. He looked gaunt. The polished shine of the marketing executive had been replaced by the hollow stare of inmate number 742. He is facing 5 years. Renata cut a plea deal, testified against him to protect herself, and relocated to Arizona to find her next mark. Clifton is alone. He sat behind the glass partition and asked me whether I hated him. I looked at my son. Really looked at him maybe for the first time in years. What I felt wasn't hate. Hate takes energy I don't have left to spend. What I felt was a heavy, settled resolve. I don't hate you, Clifton, I told him. I'm just sorry I didn't let you fall sooner. He asked when he could come home. He asked whether his room would be there for him when he got out. I didn't give him the answer he was reaching for. I didn't offer the soft landing he had counted on his entire life. When you get out, I said, you will be 45 years old. You'll have a criminal record and empty pockets. You won't be returning to the farm. The farm belongs to Drew now. It's in his name, protected inside a trust you can never touch. He started to cry. He asked me where he would go. I slid a pamphlet through the slot. A trade school that accepts ex-convicts. They teach welding, hard work, hot work, $20 an hour. You'll go there, I said. You'll learn a trade. You'll work with your hands. And for the first time in your life, you'll build something instead of stealing it. If you can manage that, if you can show me 5 years of honest tax returns, then maybe we sit down for coffee. Until then, you have a long road in front of you. I stood up and left. I didn't look back. A father's role isn't to be a crutch. It's to be a guardrail. And sometimes that means letting your child reach the bottom so they can find their own way back up. I came down the porch steps to where Drew was standing. He shut the trunk and turned to face me. He wasn't wearing the Patek Philippe watch. It's locked in a safe deposit box, waiting for the day he walks across a graduation stage. On his wrist, he wore a simple canvas strap field watch I'd picked up for him at the farm supply store. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready, Grandpa," he said. We stood there a moment listening to the wind moving through the cornfields. The land was safe. The legacy was secure. People ask me sometimes whether I regret what I did. They ask how a father could dismantle his own son's life. They look at me with judgment in their eyes, certain I must be cold, certain I must be cruel. They don't understand. I didn't dismantle Clifton's life. I stopped him from destroying his own soul. I stopped him from becoming the kind of man who would trade his child's future for a temporary seat at a table where he never belonged. I put my hand on Drew's shoulder. Neither of us needed to say a word. The bond between us had been forged in fire as I watched him drive away toward the start of his new life. I understood at last the true cost of absence. My son believed my absence from his party was an insult. He never understood that my absence was the only thing holding his lies in place. And when I finally showed up, the truth came with me. Family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It isn't about obligation or Sunday dinners or keeping up the pretense that everything is fine while the house is on fire. True family is about the people who respect the foundation you stand on. It is about those who will hold the walls up when everything caves in, not the ones who sell the bricks for pocket change. I am Harlan Mercer. I am a builder. And I have finally cleared the rubble. The ground is level now. The air is clean. And for the first time in a very long time, the view from my porch is something worth looking at. This is the end of my story, but it is the beginning of my life. If you've stayed with me this long, then you already understand why I had to do what I did. Thank you for that. Looking back now, I won't pretend it was clean or painless. Cutting that branch from the family tree left a scar. There were nights on the porch when I wondered whether I had failed somewhere along the way, whether a better father might have caught this sooner. But I believe God puts the truth in front of us exactly when we are ready to bear it, not a moment early. The Lord's timing is not always comfortable, but it is never wrong. What I carried through all of it, the anger, the grief, the paperwork, came out the other side as something I can only call peace. If this story of family justice has taught me anything worth passing on here, it is: document everything. Kindness without a paper trail is just a memory someone else can rewrite. When someone tells you who they are through their actions, believe them the first time, not the fifth. Protect the young ones at your table. They are watching how you respond when the pressure is real. And never confuse loyalty with silence. Speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes, is an act of love. These are the kinds of father stories that don't make the greeting cards, but they are the ones that actually shape a family's future. I hope something in this story of family justice landed where it needed to for you. If it did, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Leave a comment below and tell me what you took from it. I genuinely want to know. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Alpha Dad Stories, so the next one finds you. I'm grateful you were here. Take care of the people worth keeping, and take care of yourself first.